On a Tuesday morning in 1989, a small homeowner in downtown Tokyo woke up to find a wall of black trucks idling inches from his front door. He couldn't leave his house. When he picked up the phone to call for help, the line was dead. This was a message. At that exact moment, a man with missing pinky fingers was signing a multi-billion yen contract with one of the largest banks in the country. The Japanese Mafia, the Yakuza, had stopped hiding in the shadows. They had realized that while street fights were profitable, owning the dirt underneath a skyscraper was the ultimate score. By the time the sun set that day, the Yakuza weren't just criminals. They were the silent partners in a financial bubble that made the entire world look small. But a bubble is, by definition, empty, and the trillions of dollars flowing into the Yakuza's hands were about to vanish into a hole so deep, the Japanese economy still hasn't recovered. In the 1980s, Tokyo real estate was a fever dream. If you owned a tiny plot of land, you were technically a millionaire. The Japanese economy was growing at a pace that defied the laws of physics. Stock prices were doubling, and the yen was so strong that Japanese tourists were buying up half of the luxury goods in Paris and New York. But back in Tokyo, the city was running out of space. Big developers wanted to build massive office towers, but they had a problem: holdouts. These were regular families who had lived in the same small houses for generations. They didn't want the money. They wanted their homes. And the banks couldn't legally force them out. That's when the land levelers arrived. These were Yakuza squads, specifically hired by legitimate corporations to make life unlivable for anyone standing in the way of progress. They didn't just threaten people. They performed psychological sieges that felt like a slow-motion war. Imagine waking up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a chainsaw cutting down the trees in your front yard. Imagine walking out to your car to find human waste smeared across the windshield. The harassment was designed to be perfectly legal, just long enough to break your spirit. They would park giant trucks outside a family's windows and leave the engines revving for 24 hours a day. They would play funeral music on giant speakers at maximum volume during dinner time. If you had children, the Yakuza would follow them to school, never touching them, but always staying close enough for the parents to see them from the window. It was a brutal, relentless grind that destroyed the peace of ordinary people until they finally signed the papers and took the payout. Once the land was clear, the violence stopped instantly. The bulldozers moved in, the developers built their glass towers, and the Yakuza were rewarded with finder's fees worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But this was just the entry-level game. The Yakuza were beginning to realize that they didn't need to be the muscle for the corporations. They had enough cash to be the corporations. They began to trade their tattoos for tailored Italian suits and their street corners for boardroom tables. The Yakuza soon realized they didn't need to work for developers anymore. They could just become the developers themselves. They moved into the world of high finance with a speed that shocked the Japanese government. They set up thousands of paper companies, businesses that had fancy names, professional-looking business cards, and expensive office addresses, but existed only on paper. These were the shadow corporations, and they were the perfect tools for the greatest heist in history. The Yakuza used these ghosts to borrow billions from specialized banks called jusen. These were housing loan companies that were supposed to help the middle class buy homes. Instead, they became the Yakuza's personal ATM. The scam was beautifully simple. The Yakuza would use a paper company to borrow $100 million. They would use $20 million to buy a rundown building. Then, they would hire another paper company they owned to appraise that building at $500 million. They would use that fake value to get even bigger loans. The money was moving so fast that nobody bothered to check the math. Or perhaps they were too afraid to check. The Yakuza were sending the lion's share of this borrowed money to secret accounts in the Caribbean and Switzerland. They were draining the Japanese banking system like a vampire. And when the banks finally realized the money was gone and tried to ask for it back, the Yakuza just stared them down. In the United States, if you don't pay your loan, the bank takes your house. But in Japan in the early 90s, the bankers were terrified. Between 1991 and 1994, several high-ranking bank executives were found dead. The police reports often called these accidents or suicides, but everyone in the financial world knew the truth. These men were killed because they tried to collect a debt from a man with a missing pinky. The message was received loud and clear across the entire country. The Yakuza hadn't just robbed the banks, they had paralyzed the entire financial system. They were the landlords of Japan, and they weren't planning on paying rent. In 1992, the music finally stopped. The Japanese bubble exploded. The Tokyo stock market collapsed, and property values plummeted by 60, 70, even 80%. The infinite wealth of the 1980s turned into a $600 billion hole in the national budget. As the government tried to clean up the mess and figure out why the banks were empty, they found Yakuza fingerprints on almost every single bad loan in the country. The public was paying for the Yakuza's luxury cars, golden watches, and offshore mansions through their own taxes. The average Japanese worker, who had spent their life saving every yen, was now watching their future evaporate because a gangster in a suit had lied on a loan application. The backlash was nuclear. The Japanese people were done with harmony. They wanted blood. The government launched a total social execution. They passed the exclusion laws, which were designed to make it impossible for a Yakuza member to exist in a civilized society. Under these new laws, it became illegal for any business to deal with a known Yakuza member. Think about how that looks in the real world. Suddenly, these feared bosses couldn't open a bank account. They couldn't get a cell phone contract. They couldn't even sign up for health insurance or get a gym membership. If a grocery store clerk was caught selling milk to a Yakuza member, the store could be shut down. The government had turned the entire nation into a giant cage for the Yakuza. They didn't need to put every gangster behind bars because they had turned the streets of Japan into a prison. The crackdown worked with terrifying efficiency. It turned the Yakuza into social ghosts, roaming the streets but unable to participate in the world. But while the members were being erased, the money was still missing. When the police finally broke into the heavily guarded Yakuza headquarters in Osaka and Tokyo, they didn't find piles of cash. They found empty safes, dusty desks, and mountains of shredded paper. The billions of dollars that had been drained from the Japanese banks during the 80s had already vanished. The money started popping up in the strangest corners of the globe. Traces of the lost billion appeared in the accounts of private military contractors in Africa. It showed up in anonymous art collections in Europe and secret real estate developments in Southeast Asia. The Yakuza had moved their wealth into the deep web of the global economy long before the internet even existed. The era of the corporate Yakuza ended not with a deafening silence. The flashy offices are gone, replaced by quiet, gray storefronts that nobody visits. Today, the legendary bosses of the 1980s, the men who once held the Japanese economy hostage, are old men in cheap tracksuits. They are seen in parks, feeding pigeons, or walking alone through suburbs. They can't even buy a train ticket with a credit card because no bank will issue them one. Japan has reclaimed its harmony, but at a price that still haunts the national ledger. As it turns out, the most effective way to kill a monster isn't a silver bullet. It's making sure they can't open a bank account.